I'd built my life around supporting Vanessa's shine. Each morning, I'd wake an hour before her to prepare her favorite breakfast and review our finances. Every evening, I'd ensure our home was immaculate before her colleagues arrived for dinner. I never minded being the foundation rather than the facade, until I realized foundations aren't meant to be trampled on. We'd been married for 8 years, Vanessa and I. We met at a charity gala in downtown Boston where I was advising some of the donors on investment strategies. She walked in wearing a crimson dress that matched the autumn leaves outside, and the moment our eyes met across the room, I knew my life had irrevocably changed. Vanessa was magnetic, creative, vibrant, the kind of person who made every room she entered just a little bit brighter. I was steady, reliable, the financial consultant who helped wealthy clients manage their assets, the quiet one who noticed details others missed. We complemented each other perfectly. Or so I thought. Our Beacon Hill brownstone became the physical manifestation of our partnership. I spent months researching historically accurate crown moldings while she selected the perfect accent pieces. I managed the contractors, paid the bills, and kept track of maintenance schedules, while she hosted spectacular dinner parties where she showcased her impeccable taste. The division of labor seemed natural. She brought the social connections. I provided the stable foundation. And I took pride in it. In being the man who remembered that the antique radiators needed bleeding every October, who knew exactly which wine paired with her signature dishes, who scheduled her car maintenance without being asked. In all honesty, I enjoyed taking care of her. There's a certain satisfaction in being needed, in maintaining the invisible systems that allow someone else to shine. But somewhere along the way, her grateful acknowledgments became expectations. Appreciation turned into assumption. The thank yous for handling the property taxes disappeared, replaced by complaints when I used the wrong setting on the dishwasher. When did I stop being her partner and become her personal assistant? It happened so gradually I barely noticed, until Trevor Reynolds moved into the penthouse across the street. Trevor was everything I wasn't. Loud, flashy, physically imposing. The kind of man who dominated conversations at dinner parties and told slightly inappropriate jokes that had everyone hanging on his every word. He'd made millions flipping luxury properties during Boston's housing boom, and he never let anyone forget it. I noticed how Vanessa's eyes would follow him at neighborhood gatherings, how she'd laugh just a little too loudly at his jokes. I told myself I was being paranoid. Until that night on his rooftop deck. It was a perfect New England summer evening, the kind where twilight seems to stretch forever, and the lights of the Boston skyline twinkle like earthbound stars. Trevor had invited half the neighborhood for cocktails, and Vanessa had spent 2 hours getting ready, trying on 4 different outfits before settling on a silk jumpsuit I'd never seen before. I was behind the makeshift bar, mixing drinks for some of the guests. The bourbon bottle nearly slipped from my hand as her words reached me across the rooftop deck. "Poor Nathan never lasts very long," she laughed, her voice carrying over the ambient jazz music. "I'm always left to finish things myself." As their friends erupted in laughter, I stood frozen, invisible yet exposed. The Boston skyline blurred before my eyes as I realized my wife had turned our most intimate moments into public entertainment. My hands trembled slightly as I continued pouring drinks, my face burning with humiliation. Trevor raised his glass with an exaggerated wink. 2 short performances, he toasted, and everyone, including my wife, clinked glasses in response. I somehow made it through the rest of the evening on autopilot, smiling and nodding at appropriate intervals while feeling completely hollow inside. We didn't speak on the walk home, the weight of her betrayal hanging between us like a physical presence. She must have sensed something was wrong, but she didn't ask, and I didn't volunteer. Maybe she thought I hadn't heard. Maybe she didn't care if I had. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed with a notification. A text message had been synced to our shared cloud account. It was from Trevor to Vanessa. "Your joke about Nathan's stamina was hilarious. Sounds like you might need someone who can go the distance." I felt physically ill. With shaking hands, I reached for her tablet on the nightstand. She never logged out of anything, secure in the knowledge that I respected her privacy too much to snoop. Not tonight. It didn't take long to find it. A location notification showing she had visited Trevor's penthouse at 1:27 a.m. 3 weeks ago. During my business trip to New York, I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and returned to my side of the bed. At 2:17 a.m., as Vanessa slept peacefully beside me, I began cataloging my invisibility. Every bill I managed, every appointment I tracked, every preference I remembered. Each entry wasn't just a task. It was evidence of my erasure. By dawn, I had 4 pages of bullet points and a resolution. I would reclaim my visibility by disappearing completely. Have you ever felt so utterly invisible in your own relationship that you wonder if you'd even be missed if you vanished? That night, I decided to find out. I didn't confront her about Trevor or the party. That would have been too predictable, too easily dismissed with tears and promises. Instead, I named my plan Operation Visibility and began implementing it the very next morning. I made her favorite breakfast, French toast with fresh berries and locally sourced maple syrup, and placed it in front of her with a cup of perfectly brewed coffee. "Enjoy this," I said quietly. "It's the last time." She laughed, assuming I was joking, and scrolled through her phone as she ate. I watched her, memorizing the moment. The first electric bill came due 3 days later. I ignored it. For 7 years, I'd managed all our household finances, paying everything on time, often early. Vanessa had never once worried about keeping the lights on or the water running, until now. A week later, during an important client presentation at her agency, the power in our home office went out, cutting her Zoom call short. "What happened?" she demanded when she finally got through to me on her cell phone. "The electricity," I replied calmly. "The bill was due last week." "Why didn't you pay it?" she asked, bewildered. "I thought you wanted to take more responsibility," I said. I must have misunderstood. Her confusion was palpable even through the phone. That was just the beginning. I stopped reminding her about appointments, her dental cleaning, her hair colorist, her quarterly business taxes. I no longer restocked her favorite snacks or made sure her car had gas before important meetings. The smart home system that controlled our thermostat, security cameras, and entertainment center mysteriously malfunctioned during an important dinner party she was hosting for potential clients. When she frantically called me for help, I simply said, "I'm sure you can handle it," and returned to my book. Each small withdrawal created a ripple effect in her perfectly curated existence. The tipping point came when her parents decided to visit. Eleanor and Richard Carter had always announced their visits weeks in advance, giving me time to prepare the guest room, stock the kitchen with their favorites, and arrange appropriate activities. This time, they called Vanessa directly, and I didn't remind her. When her mother called the day before they were set to arrive, Vanessa was completely blindsided. As Vanessa stood in our kitchen, surrounded by unwashed dishes and unprepared guest rooms, her carefully constructed image crumbled. "Did you know my parents were coming?" she asked, voice trembling. "Yes," I replied, "but you said you wanted to manage things yourself." I watched as realization dawned in her eyes. This wasn't a temporary lapse, but a deliberate withdrawal. For the first time in our marriage, she saw the invisible scaffold I'd built around her life, now conspicuous only in its absence. Part of me felt vindicated watching her scramble to prepare for her parents, ordering takeout instead of cooking the elaborate meals she usually served them, hastily clearing out the guest room that had become her home office. Another part felt hollow. Was this what our marriage had come to? A war of attrition? I hadn't mentioned Trevor or the humiliation at the party. I hadn't accused her of anything. But every time she looked at me now, I could see the question in her eyes. "How much do you know?" The visit with her parents was a disaster. Without my careful planning and attention to detail, every misstep was magnified. Eleanor noticed immediately that Richard's favorite scotch wasn't in the bar cart. The tickets I usually purchased for their traditional evening at the Boston Symphony were conspicuously absent. The conversation at dinner was strained, with lengthy, uncomfortable silences where I would normally have smoothed things over with thoughtful questions. I simply watched, contributing the bare minimum to maintain civility. By the 3rd day, Vanessa broke down. I found her crying in our bedroom after her parents left for their hotel. "What is happening, Nathan?" she asked through tears. "Did I do something wrong? Why are you punishing me?" I looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not punishing you, Vanessa. I'm just letting you experience life without me handling everything." "But why? We were happy." Were we? I wondered. Or was I just convenient? A human Swiss Army knife designed to make her life frictionless? I didn't say these things out loud. Instead, I simply said, "Maybe you should ask yourself why you needed to humiliate me in front of our friends." Her face paled. She knew exactly what I was referring to. "Nathan, it was just a joke. Everyone laughs about their spouse sometimes. It didn't mean anything. I nodded slowly. And Trevor? Did visiting his penthouse at 1 in the morning while I was in New York not mean anything either? The color drained completely from her face. How did you... It doesn't matter how I know, I interrupted. What matters is what happens next. She reached for me, but I stepped back. Nothing happened with Trevor, she insisted. I went there to pick up some design magazines he'd borrowed, that's all. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe she wasn't. At that point, I wasn't sure it mattered. The betrayal wasn't just about potential infidelity. It was about respect. Or rather, the complete lack of it. Have you ever reached that breaking point in a relationship where you realize that continuing as things are would cost you your self-respect? That's where I found myself, standing across from the woman I had loved and supported for nearly a decade, wondering if she'd ever truly seen me at all. The next few weeks continued in the same vein. I withdrew further, and Vanessa became increasingly frantic trying to manage the details of our life that had previously run so smoothly. Bills piled up. Appointments were missed. The garden I had meticulously maintained began to wither. She tried everything to restore our previous dynamic. Tears, anger, seduction, guilt. Nothing worked. I remained polite but distant, doing only what pertained directly to my needs and responsibilities. Through it all, I carefully documented the collapse of her perfect life in the absence of my support, not out of cruelty, but to prove a point, to her and to myself. Then came the moment that would determine our future. I decided to host a neighborhood barbecue in our backyard, inviting the same people who had witnessed my humiliation at Trevor's party. Vanessa was surprised but cautiously optimistic, perhaps seeing it as an olive branch. I spent the day preparing, grilling steaks to perfection, mixing cocktails, and engaging in conversation with our neighbors. I was charming, attentive, the perfect host. Vanessa watched me with a mixture of confusion and hope. When Trevor arrived uninvited, I didn't react. I simply handed him a beer and continued my conversation with Dr. Martin Chen, a longtime client who had become something of a mentor to me. As the evening progressed, I noticed Trevor cornering Vanessa near the garden, leaning in too close, making another crude joke about stamina that carried just far enough for several guests to overhear. This time I was prepared. I walked over calmly, a manila envelope in my hand. Without a word, I placed its contents on the garden table. Security camera footage showing Vanessa entering Trevor's building at 1:27 a.m., screenshots of their text exchanges, all meticulously organized and time-stamped. Not enough to prove an affair, but more than enough to raise serious questions. The silence that fell over our gathering was deafening. "Trevor," I said quietly, "I think it's time for you to leave." There was something in my tone, a calm certainty perhaps, that made several of our male neighbors stand a little straighter, ready to enforce my request if necessary. Trevor looked from me to the evidence, then to Vanessa, whose face had gone completely white. Without another word, he turned and left. I didn't create a scene. I didn't need to. The power had shifted perceptibly, and everyone felt it. The party continued, subdued but not uncomfortable. For the first time in our marriage, I saw respect in the eyes of our friends when they looked at me. Not pity, not amusement, but genuine respect. When everyone had gone and we were cleaning up, Vanessa finally spoke. "I never slept with him," she said, her voice barely audible. "I wanted to feel desired again. Powerful, but I never crossed that line." I nodded, not indicating whether I believed her or not. "Is this it for us?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes. "Are we over?" I considered her question carefully. Despite everything, there was still something between us worth salvaging, if she was willing to do the work. "That depends," I said. "I'm proposing a 6-month probationary period for our marriage." "Probationary period?" she repeated, as if trying to make sense of the words. "Yes, we establish clear expectations, responsibilities, and boundaries. Everything is explicit, nothing assumed. At the end of 6 months, we decide whether to rebuild or to separate. It wasn't romantic, but neither was being taken for granted for years. And if I agree to this, Probation? She asked tentatively. Then we start tomorrow. Equal partnership. Real consequences. No more invisible husband doing everything behind the scenes while you take the credit. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. I understand. The next morning, I found a leather-bound journal on my desk. Inside, Vanessa had documented every task I had handled that she'd taken for granted, with notes acknowledging their importance. On the final page, she wrote, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm learning what real stamina means, the strength to admit when you're wrong. It was a start. Over the next 6 months, our marriage transformed into something neither of us had expected. The power balance shifted, then equalized. We created systems where responsibilities were shared, acknowledged, and valued. She learned how to manage our household finances. I learned to let her handle things without micromanaging. We established weekly check-ins to discuss what was working and what wasn't. There were setbacks, of course. Old patterns tried to reassert themselves. Sometimes she'd fall back into taking me for granted. Sometimes I'd withhold support out of lingering resentment. But each time, we'd recognize the pattern and correct course. If this sounds familiar, this struggle to be truly seen in your relationship, know that you're not alone. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought in the quietest moments, in the space between what we give and what is acknowledged. Trevor moved away 3 months into our reconciliation. I heard he'd found a job opportunity in Seattle, though the neighborhood gossip suggested he'd worn out his welcome in our community after that night at our barbecue. Vanessa never mentioned him again. 6 months later, we sat on our rooftop deck watching fireworks over Boston Harbor. I never understood what you did until you stopped doing it, Vanessa admitted, her hand finding mine in the darkness. I thought stamina meant something else entirely. I didn't say I forgave her, those words weren't ready yet. But as she squeezed my hand, I felt something new taking root between us. Not blind trust, but something stronger. Earned respect. Sometimes the only way to be truly seen is to disappear completely, then return on your own terms. Our marriage isn't perfect now. We still struggle, still hurt each other sometimes. But we see each other clearly, strengths, flaws, and all. And that visibility, that honest recognition of who we truly are, forms a foundation far stronger than the one I built alone. If this story resonated with you, like and subscribe to hear more stories about reclaiming your power in relationships. Comment below about a time you had to make yourself visible. Because sometimes the quietest revolutions are the most profound. Those moments when we finally stand up and say, see me. Recognize what I bring to this table. Accept me not as a convenience, but as an equal partner deserving of respect. In the end, that's all any of us really want, to be truly seen for who we are and valued for what we contribute. And sometimes, paradoxically, the only way to be seen is to disappear first. Let that absence speak volumes until they finally hear you.